There are some people, when faced with the weak, the oppressed, or the overlooked, choose to push them down instead of lifting them up, don't they? A proud female fighter had forced a young black girl into the ring to humiliate her. But then, no one saw what happened next. Before we continue following the dramatic developments ahead, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to give me motivation to keep bringing you more captivating stories. And where are you listening to this story from? Leave a comment and let me know. Now, let's return to the story. Imagine this, Perpetuating. You are standing in the middle of a brightly lit gym. Your hands clenched around the worn fabric of a duffel bag, its edges frayed with the years. The floor beneath you is cold, Kyle, and the walls around you gleam white, sterile, making you feel smaller than you already are. Every eye in the room is on you, not with sympathy, but with judgment, with a kind of scorn that can make you feel burned even before it's spoken. You can feel the weight of it, heavy, almost suffocating, and yet despite it all, you refuse to back down. Anna Barney stood there, her shoes so worn they nearly fell apart with each step, the weight of every look pressing into her back. She wasn't supposed to be there, not in this gym, not in this world. This place, with its gleaming walls and polished floor, was meant for champions, world-class fighters, wealthy athletes, people who were meant to be there. And yet here she was, a girl from a poor neighborhood, a young woman who had fought for everything she had, carrying the weight of a lifetime of struggles on her shoulders. She had heard the whispers before, the murmurs that always followed her wherever she went. People who thought she didn't belong, that she was just another statistic, another failed dream, in a city that chewed people up and spit them out. But she wasn't a failure, not then, not now. She had fought for everything, she had clawed her way through every obstacle life had thrown at her. And even though the world didn't think she was worthy of standing in this gym, she knew something they didn't. She was stronger than any of them could ever understand. And then there was Violet Smith. Violet stood in the middle of the gym, in a perfect picture of everything Anna was not. Tall, poised, a world champion boxer with a social media following that stretched into the millions. Her muscles were sculpted, her face a mask of smug confidence, and she looked at Anna the way a lion looks at an antelope. Anna was nothing to her, just another pawn in a game that she had mastered long ago. Violet had built her career on being untouchable, on taunting her opponents, on belittling them in the public eye, making them bow before her like they were nothing. She had seen Anna walk into the gym, the ragged edges of her clothes and the way her sneakers nearly buckled beneath her. The laughter that followed her was sharp, cutting through the silence of the gym. She thought it was funny at first, but that humor quickly turned to something else, something darker. Violet took a step toward Anna, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "Look at what we have here," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, every syllable designed to wound. "A lost little girl from the slums. What's she doing in a place like this? This isn't a charity, sweetheart. We train champions here, not charity cases." The gym fell silent, the sound of punches against heavy bags stopping abruptly. All eyes shifted to Anna, her dark skin standing out against the bright, sterile white walls. She stood there clutching her duffel bag tightly, but she refused to let it show. She refused to let them see the tremor in her hand, the hesitation in her heart. When her voice came, it was quiet but firm. "I thought this was a scholarship program for teens." Violet's laughter rang out through the gym, loud and mocking, a sound that made Anna's chest tighten with frustration. "A scholarship? Sweetheart, this isn't some social experiment. We train real athletes here." Anna's gaze flickered to the floor for a moment. The cracked screen on her phone had somehow become the focus of the entire room. And for a brief second, she wondered if she was even worth the trouble. She wasn't the girl who had everything. She wasn't the one with the flashy clothes or the designer trainers. She was the girl who had spent her life working for what she had, scraping by, fighting for every inch of progress. She wasn't supposed to be here, and yet here she was. She lifted her chin, meeting Violet's gaze without flinching. "I'm on the approved list," she said, her voice steady. "So what's the problem?" Violet's face twitched, the smirk faltering for just a second, but only a second. "Really, Tom?" she called out, her voice ringing out across the room. "You're turning this gym into a charity? Letting anyone off the street come in and pretend they belong here?" Tom Rodriguez, the gym owner and veteran coach, stood in the corner, his arms crossed, watching the exchange unfold. He had been in this business long enough to see it all: the egos, the arrogance, the fragile pride of champions who couldn't see beyond their own reflection. And he knew that what was happening now was not just a fight in the ring. It was a battle of egos, a test of who could break whom first. Violet was the one who made the first move, stepping closer to Anna with a calculated, predatory glint in her eyes. "If you think you belong here, why don't we settle this with a little match?" she sneered. "Let's see if you really deserve that scholarship. A friendly bout between you and me." The words stung, and Anna knew it was more than just a challenge. This was Violet's attempt to humiliate her, to show the gym and herself that Anna didn't belong. It wasn't about fighting. It was about breaking Anna's spirit, about proving once again that people like her didn't deserve a place in this world. Tom stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Anna with concern. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice soft but filled with warning. "You don't need to prove anything." But Anna wasn't backing down. She had heard this before. She had been told her whole life that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong. She had heard it from people who had never walked a day in her shoes, never understood what it meant to fight for survival. And she wasn't about to let Violet or anyone else decide her worth for her. "I accept," Anna said, her voice calm, unwavering. Violet's eyes narrowed, and she stepped back, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. She thought she had won. But Anna, standing still and steady in the center of the ring, felt something shift deep inside her. This wasn't just a fight. This was her moment to show the world that strength wasn't about titles or fame. Strength was about standing your ground no matter what, and Anna Barnes was about to show them just that. The bell rang, and the fight began, but the gym had already shifted in its energy. It wasn't just about who could land the hardest punch or who had the quickest reflexes. It was about something far deeper. The spectators, once quiet and unsure, now leaned in, sensing the tension in the air. The air itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, but beneath that anticipation there was something else. A growing understanding that this was not a typical match. Something more was at stake. Violet Smith, the world champion, charged at Anna with the ferocity of someone used to winning. Her fists cut through the air, sharp and unforgiving. She was the kind of boxer who built her career on speed, on overwhelming her opponents with sheer force and brute strength. In her mind, this was supposed to be easy. Anna, the poor girl from Detroit, the one with the ragged clothes and the worn shoes, she didn't belong in this ring. Violet's confidence, her sense of superiority, had been so deeply ingrained that she was almost blind to the possibility of her defeat. But Anna was different. She had spent her life learning how to fight, not just with her fists, but with everything she had. What? She had learned to protect herself in a world that had never made space for her. A world that constantly told her she wasn't enough. Her hands were calloused from years of hard work, her heart tempered by the unrelenting grind of survival. What Violet failed to see, what everyone in the gym failed to understand, was that Anna's fight wasn't about proving something to them. It was about proving something to herself, her worth, her strength, and her ability to stand unbroken in the face of adversity. As Violet swung her first punch out, Anna didn't panic. She didn't try to dodge it immediately. No, Anna simply moved. She slipped to the side, a fluid motion, as if the punch had never been there at all. And then, with a calm precision that came from years of training on the harsh streets of Detroit, she retaliated, not with aggression, but with purpose. Her fist hit Violet's side, a sharp jab that caused the world champion to pause. For the first time, the confidence in Violet's eyes faltered. The crowd gasped, the sound almost too sharp to bear. They had expected Anna to be overwhelmed. They had expected her to crumble under the pressure, to flinch at the first hint of violence. But Anna didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She had already faced far worse in her life than anything Violet could throw at her. And as she stood there, her breathing steady, her focus unbroken, she realized something. The fight wasn't just in her body. It was in her mind, in the quiet strength she had built over the years. The years of watching her mother, Martha, struggle in the factory. The years of facing bullies in the streets. The years of learning how to fight for her life. Violet, however, wasn't used to being challenged. Her world had been one of certainty. She had built her reputation on her fists. Her presence in the ring, her social media persona. And now, here she was, facing a woman who wasn't just another opponent. She was a reflection of every lesson Violet had refused to learn. She was everything Violet had taken for granted: humility, resilience, and quiet strength. The punches kept coming, but they no longer seemed as controlled, as calculated. Violet's swings became more frantic, more desperate. Anna's calmness unnerved her. She had expected to break her opponent, to see fear in her eyes, to watch her crumble under the weight of the insults and taunts. But Anna wasn't crumbling. She wasn't even moving with fear. She moved with purpose, with intention. And every time Anna dodged or blocked a strike, she grew stronger. The confidence that had once radiated from Violet now seemed brittle, shaky, as if it could break at any moment. The gym was silent now, except for the sound of punches landing against flesh and leather. The air was thick with the realization that something unexpected was happening. Violet's arrogance, her belief that she could easily break Anna, had been shattered. Every time Violet threw a punch and missed, every time Anna countered with her unrelenting precision, Violet's world seemed to close in around her. The crowd, once divided, was now holding its breath. What had begun as a spectacle, something they thought would end in humiliation for Anna, was now a spectacle of a different kind, a testament to strength that came from within, a strength that wasn't measured in the weight of a punch or the reputation of a fighter. It was measured in the way Anna stood in the face of everything. Unbroken, unyielding. Violet was starting to lose control. Her punches had no rhythm now, no form. They were angry, fueled by frustration and panic. She had never had to fight like this. She had always been the one to dictate the pace, to break her opponents down mentally before she ever threw a punch. But Anna was different. Anna wasn't going to break. And with every missed punch, with every failed attempt to humiliate her, Violet's grip on the fight slipped further and further away. The Anna's footwork was flawless, her stance perfect. She didn't need to land every punch. She didn't need to show off. She was winning, not with power, but with strategy. She was showing the world that strength was not about who could hit hardest. It was about who could endure, who could hold on to their dignity in the face of everything that tried to break them. As the second round drew to a close, Anna remained steady, her breath calm, her gaze never leaving Violet. She had already won, and it wasn't because she had landed more punches or had outmaneuvered her opponent. It was because she had shown the world that no matter how much they tried to belittle her, no matter how much they tried to break her down, they could never take her strength away. Violet, still trying to regain her composure, looked at Anna through narrowed eyes. She couldn't understand it. She couldn't understand how this fight was slipping away from her. She had been so sure that she could break her, but Anna was still standing, still there. And for the first time in her career, Violet wasn't the one in control. The bell rang again, Kono, and the sound sliced through the silence like a cruel reminder that this fight was far from over. The tension in the gym thickened, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of what was happening. Everyone had expected the second round to be a formality. Violet, the world champion, would wipe the floor with the unknown girl from Detroit. But as Anna stood in her corner, her hands resting calmly at her sides, her eyes unwavering, the crowd began to understand. Sturiat, this wasn't just a fight. It was a lesson, and it wasn't Anna who was being taught. Violet, once the embodiment of confidence, was now a shell of the fighter who had entered the ring just moments ago. Her movements had lost their fluidity. The strength in her punches now tempered by uncertainty. She was used to facing opponents who bent to her will, who wilted under the pressure of her sharp tongue and even sharper fists. But Anna, with her quiet resolve and unwavering focus, wasn't bending, she wasn't buckling. In fact, she was standing taller, more determined than ever. As the third round began, Anna could feel the shift within her. It wasn't the adrenaline of victory that drove her. No, it was something much deeper, something rooted in every fight she had ever faced. The street fights she had fought back home, the struggles she had watched her mother endure, the endless battle to prove that she was more than her circumstances, that she was more than the world saw her to be. Each movement, each punch she threw, was a statement that her strength wasn't born from brute force. It was born from survival. Violet came at her with fury, her face twisted in frustration. She threw a punch aimed at Anna's head. But Anna, as calm and deliberate as ever, sidestepped the attack, her footwork impeccable. The crowd gasped, a collective breath held as they watched the world champion miss yet another blow. Anna countered with a quick jab to Violet's ribs, the sound of the punch landing sharp and clean. Violet stumbled backward, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. She had never been in a fight like this. She had always relied on her superior conditioning, on her reputation, to break her opponents. But Anna wasn't like the others. Anna wasn't a contender to be broken. She wasn't an opponent to be intimidated. Anna was a mirror, reflecting back every flaw, every weakness, every moment of self-doubt that Violet had buried under layers of arrogance and pride. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, shifting in their seats. What they had expected to be a quick and humiliating display of Violet's dominance was now a nail-biting spectacle of defiance. Anna was winning, not because she was landing more punches, but because she was showing Violet something that no one had ever shown her before. That strength wasn't about forcing others to bend to your will. It was about knowing who you were and standing firm, no matter what. As the third round wore on, Violet's punches became more erratic. Her eyes narrowed, but her focus wavered. Each missed blow chipped away at the confidence she had always held so tightly. She swung again, this time with more desperation, more anger, but Anna saw it coming. With a swift sidestep, she left Violet flailing, off balance, vulnerable, and Anna moved in. This time, her strike was precise. Her left jab hit Violet's face, and the sharp contact made the world champion stagger. For a brief, fleeting moment, Violet's knees buckled beneath her, her body faltering as she tried to maintain her composure. She gasped, her breath shallow, her mind racing to catch up with the realization that she was losing. The crowd's gasps grew louder, and Anna felt the weight of it. The shift in the air, the realization that she was no longer the underdog. She was the one in control. Violet blinked rapidly, her gaze hardening as she pushed herself back into position. Her lip curled, but it wasn't with the smugness she had entered the ring with. It was the twisted expression of someone who had been caught off guard, someone who had underestimated her opponent in the most painful way possible. The fight was no longer about strength. It was no longer about physical power or the ability to outlast the other. It had shifted into something deeper, something Violet hadn't prepared for. It was a mental battle now, a test of who could withstand the most, who could endure the longest. Violet swung again, but Anna, now in perfect rhythm, blocked the blow effortlessly, using her body's natural movements to deflect the strike. She was no longer just avoiding Violet's punches. She was controlling the fight, dictating its pace, forcing Violet to work harder and harder for every inch of space. Violet's movements were growing sloppy now, fueled more by frustration and anger than technique. Her breath was ragged, her shoulders slumped, as she tried to regain some semblance of composure. Anna, ever steady, wasn't intimidated. With a quiet grace, she danced around Violet's blows, landing punch after punch with precision. And then, in a brief moment of vulnerability, Anna saw it, the opening, the crack in Violet's armor. It wasn't physical, it was mental. Violet, the great world champion, had broken. In that instant, Anna stepped forward, not with aggression, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knew that this moment wasn't just about fighting. It was about showing the world that strength wasn't something you had to prove. It was something you could share, something that could uplift others, even when the world tried to push you down. Anna's fist connected with Violet's face in a clean, swift motion. The punch was quick and sharp, but it wasn't about the damage it did to her opponent's body. It was about the message it sent. Anna wasn't backing down. She wasn't yielding. She wasn't going to let anyone, not even Violet, tell her where she belonged. Violet's body staggered back once more, her head snapping from the force of the blow. The crowd held its collective breath as the world champion collapsed to her knees. And there, in that brief moment of stillness, Anna knew she had won. Not because of the punches she had landed, but because she had proven something deeper than any physical victory ever could. That strength, in its truest form, was about endurance. And Anna had endured. Violet stumbled, her knees scraping against the canvas of the ring, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. For the first time, she found herself questioning everything. The crowd had fallen silent, their eyes wide, waiting, as if the air itself was too thick with the weight of the moment to allow any noise. Violet's vision blurred for a second, her body trembling, the sting of Anna's punch reverberating through her skull. It wasn't just the blow that hurt. It was the humiliation, the realization that the world champion, once untouchable, once revered, was now kneeling, not to a fellow contender, but to the quiet strength of a woman she had underestimated. And as she knelt there, the harsh lights above casting sharp shadows on her face, something shifted inside Violet. The arrogance, the bravado, the years of self-constructed superiority, all of it began to slip away, piece by piece, as the reality of the fight set in. This wasn't a simple sparring match. It was a battle of wills. It was Anna, the fighter from the streets, with nothing but her unshakable dignity and relentless willpower, facing down the proud world champion who had never been forced to question her place at the top. Violet wiped the blood from her mouth, her fingers trembling as they came away, slick with red. She could hear the sound of the crowd, distant now, their murmurs rising in volume. They were talking about her, talking about what she had become in that ring, talking about how she had been so sure, so confident, that she could crush this girl without even breaking a sweat. The confidence she had worn like a second skin was now a ragged, tattered garment that barely clung to her. She pushed herself up, her arms shaking with the effort. And for a brief moment her eyes met Anna's. Anna stood, still as stone, watching her opponent with an unwavering gaze, as though she were waiting for the inevitable. And in that moment something passed between them, an understanding, unspoken but clear. Violet had been defeated. Not just in body, but in spirit. The woman who had built her entire identity on the destruction of others, on mocking the weak, on elevating herself above everyone else, had been humbled by the one thing she could never fight against: dignity. Violet felt her chest tighten, a cold wave of nausea washing over her. This wasn't just about the loss of a title, of a championship. This was about losing something much more precious: her sense of self. She had relied on the idea that she was invincible, that her fame, her power, her image would shield her from the real fight, the one that was happening inside her own mind. But Anna Barnes, with her quiet strength, her unbroken spirit, had shattered that illusion. The bell rang again, signaling the continuation of the round. But Violet stood frozen in place to make the first move. Her body was drained, her mind clouded by the defeat she was struggling to accept. Anna didn't rush in. She didn't press the attack. Instead, she waited. She waited for Violet to make her move, for Violet to come to terms with the reality of the fight. Anna wasn't concerned with the outcome of the match in the way that Violet was. She didn't care about the accolades, the titles, or the fame. She didn't need them. Anna's victory had already been won, not in the ring, but in the journey that had brought her here. The years of pain, of loss, of fighting for survival, of standing. When the world told her to kneel, she had already proven in that moment that strength was not a commodity to be traded in public view. It was a quiet, internal force that could never be taken from you unless you allowed it. Violet swung again, a wild, uncontrolled punch that tore through the air with a desperate ferocity, but Anna was already moving. She sidestepped, almost effortlessly letting the punch sail past her. Her footwork was impeccable, her body a seamless expression of the confidence that Violet could no longer fathom. As she moved, her body swayed like a tree in the wind, bending but never breaking. She countered with a quick jab, not with power but with precision. Violet's body jolted as the punch connected with her midsection. The blow wasn't enough to knock her out, but it was enough to send her stumbling once again. Her knees faltering beneath, Violet tried to steady herself, but she couldn't find her balance. Her mind raced, her thoughts scrambling to hold on to something familiar, something solid. She had always relied on her aggression, on the force of her punches, on the power that came from being the stronger fighter. But now all of that seemed meaningless. She had met her match, and it wasn't in the form of a bigger, stronger fighter. It was in the form of a woman who knew her own worth. The crowd, once so captivated by Violet's every move, who was now focused entirely on Anna. They had come for a show, expecting the world champion to deliver a spectacle of power and grace. Instead, they were witnessing something far more profound, strident the unraveling of a champion. They could see it now, how the mask had slipped, how the confidence had faltered. It wasn't about fighting for the title anymore. It was about fighting to hold on to something that had always been just an illusion. Anna didn't need the crowd's approval. She didn't need the adoration of fans. She was winning, not because she was better in the ring, but because she had already won the fight that mattered, the fight to remain true to herself. As she moved around the ring, her gaze never left Violet. She was in complete control. Every time Violet swung, she saw it before it happened. Every time Violet faltered, Anna knew exactly how to respond. Not with aggression, not with anger, but with grace. Violet's face had turned pale, her once proud features now marked with the exhaustion of defeat. Her eyes no longer held the sharp edge of superiority, but the dull, exhausted gaze of someone who had been broken. She was breathing heavily now, struggling to keep her feet under her. Every punch that missed, every step she took toward Anna, only seemed to push her deeper into the reality that she was no longer the champion she had once been. And in that moment, as Anna stood poised and calm in the center of the ring, she realized that this was more than just a fight. It was a reckoning for both of them. The fourth round bell rang, its shrill sound punctuating the silence that had overtaken the gym. The energy in the room was electric but muted, like the air before a storm. The crowd, which had once been animated, was now dead silent. They watched transfixed as two fighters stood in the ring, one barely able to hold herself up, and the other exuding the calm, controlled intensity of someone who had already won. Even before the first punch was thrown, Violet's body was betraying her. The confidence that had once been so deeply embedded in her every step, in every word, was slowly being replaced by something else, a sinking feeling in her chest that she couldn't push away. It was the realization that she was no longer the one in control, that she wasn't the one who dictated the pace of the fight, that in front of her stood a woman who had learned to fight in ways Violet could never understand. Anna wasn't just using her fists, she was using her mind, her heart, her soul. Violet's fists, once the tools of her supremacy, had become clumsy, too heavy with the weight of her pride. Anna, standing in the opposite corner, took a deep breath. Her body was bruised, tired from the relentless pace of the fight. But her mind was steady. She had lived through worse than this, been tested in ways that Violet would never understand. Every step she had taken in this gym, every punch she had thrown, was an answer to the life she had fought to escape. She wasn't just in this fight for herself. She was fighting for every kid who had been told they didn't belong, for every woman who had been underestimated, for every person who had been made to feel smaller than they were. Her heart beat steady in her chest, matching the rhythm of her feet as they shuffled across the canvas. She knew what was at stake, not the title, not the media attention, but the truth that had lived in her for so long. She had already won. She knew it. Violet, though, was still scrambling. The reality of the fight was starting to crash down on her like an avalanche. Her pride, once a fortress, had been eroded by Anna's precision, by her resilience, by her quiet strength. Anna had exposed the cracks, the moments of insecurity that Violet had spent her whole career trying to hide. And now there was no denying it. Violet was tired, physically, mentally, emotionally. With a quick breath, she pushed herself forward, trying to regain some semblance of the dominance she had once held over her opponents. She swung wildly, her body instinctively reacting out of sheer desperation. Her punch landed, barely, but it didn't matter. Anna slipped under it with the fluidity of water flowing through a crack. Violet's movements were too erratic now, too forced. There was no grace, no rhythm, just a frantic need to end it, to prove that she was still the champion. Anna, however, remained calm. She didn't need to prove anything to Violet or to the crowd or to anyone. Her fight had never been about validation. It had always been about proving to herself that she was enough, that the world, with all its judgment, with all its prejudices, could not define her. As Violet swung again, her arm trembling with the effort, Anna's body moved like it had a mind of its own. She ducked under the punch and, in one swift motion, brought her knee up into Violet's midsection. The force of it was enough to knock the wind from Violet's lungs. She gasped, stumbling back, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and desperation. Anna stood still, waiting. She had no need to rush. The fight, to her, wasn't about the clock or the crowd. It was about the battle inside of herself, about showing the world, once and for all, that no one, not even the so-called champions, could break her. Violet gasped for air, her breath shallow and quick. She wasn't sure what had happened. One moment she was in control. The next she was gasping for breath, her body betraying her, her mind lost in a haze of confusion. She could feel the eyes of the gym on her, Reno, but it wasn't admiration. It wasn't the worship she was used to. It was something else. It was pity. And that, more than anything else, was what hurt the most. Violet's mind raced as she staggered back toward her corner, trying to steady herself. She wiped the sweat from her brow, but the movement felt futile. She was tired, so tired, tired in a way she had never been before. She had been so sure of herself, so sure of her place in the world. But now, in the ring, with Anna Barnes standing across from her, Violet saw what she had refused to see before. She wasn't invincible, she wasn't untouchable, she was human, just like everyone else. And that realization, that quiet truth, was the hardest blow of all. Anna took a slow step forward, her gaze never leaving Violet. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't reveling in the moment. There was no sense of triumph in her movements. There was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had stood tall, even when the world had told her to shrink. She had endured, she had fought, and now, as Violet struggled to recover, Anna knew that she had already won. The bell rang again, but this time the crowd was silent. No one cheered, no one screamed. It was as if the gym itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Anna moved with steady purpose, and as she closed the gap between her and Violet, there was a brief, fleeting moment when she saw it. The look in Violet's eyes, the acknowledgement, the understanding. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about dignity. It was about strength. And Violet, for the first time in her life, understood what it truly meant to be strong. Anna moved in, her fists raised. But this time she didn't strike with the same force. She didn't need to. She was already ahead, already beyond the fight. And when the final punch landed, it was not a punch of destruction, but one of liberation. A liberation that resonated deep inside Anna, in the very core of her being. This was her moment, and she had taken it. The gym, which had been alive with the harsh sounds of punches and taunts, now stood still, a deep, almost palpable silence hanging in the air. It wasn't the silence of defeat, nor the silence of triumph. It was the silence of realization. For the first time, the crowd understood the true nature of this fight. It was no longer about the victory of one fighter over another. Arseval Sebranket illusions. It was about the breaking down of illusions, the illusion of superiority, the illusion of invincibility, and the illusion that some were born to be champions while others were destined to lose. Violet Smith, once a figure of strength and dominance, stood at the center of the ring, her knees weak, her breath shallow. She could still taste the bitterness of Anna's last punch in her mouth, but it wasn't the physical pain that hurt the most. No, it was the mental fracture, the sudden awareness that everything she had built her life on, all the years of training, of winning, of being the one everyone looked up to, had been shattered in a single moment. She wasn't the strongest in the ring anymore. She wasn't the queen of the world. And the weight of that loss hung over her like a dark cloud. She looked up at Anna, who stood there, not in the posture of a victor, but in the quiet demeanor of someone who had known all along that this fight wasn't just about the title. Anna wasn't fighting to prove herself to anyone. She wasn't fighting for validation. She was fighting for something deeper, something only she could define, her own self-worth. And in that moment, Anna's gaze wasn't filled with the arrogance of someone who had just conquered an opponent. It was filled with the quiet strength of someone who had learned to stand on her own, regardless of the world's opinions. For a long moment, Violet just stood there, her body trembling, not sure whether she should fight to her feet or sink further into the realization of her defeat. She wanted to feel anger, to feel the rush of her former self, but all she felt was emptiness, a profound, aching emptiness that seemed to swallow her whole. In her mind, she could hear the words of her trainers, her sponsors, her fans, telling her that she was unstoppable, that she was destined for greatness. But now, standing in the center of the ring, it all felt hollow. What was the point of winning, of proving you were the best, if it was all built on a foundation of arrogance and condescension? And then she saw it, Anna's eyes, calm and unwavering, filled not with triumph, but with understanding. Anna wasn't standing there as if she had conquered something. She was standing there because she had survived. And the weight of it all hit Violet like a ton of bricks. The fight for Anna wasn't about victory. It was about endurance. It was about rising after being knocked down, time and time again, and never giving up. It was a fight for dignity, not just in the ring, but in the world. And it was that dignity that had won the fight, not the punches, not the titles, not the belts. Violet's gaze shifted away from Anna, focusing instead on the floor beneath her, the cold surface of the ring. It was as if she was seeing everything in a new light. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove something to the world, trying to convince everyone that she was the best, that she deserved to be on top. But now she realized something she had never considered. It wasn't about being the best. It was about being real. And for the first time in her career, she felt the crushing weight of her own inauthenticity. Anna, on the other hand, hadn't even moved from her spot. She wasn't going to press the advantage any further. She wasn't the type to gloat or mock her opponent, not even when the opportunity was there. Anna knew that her victory, such as it was, didn't need to be celebrated. It was a quiet kind of victory, one that came not from the acclaim of the crowd, but from the deep, unspoken recognition of self-worth. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to murmur. There was no celebration now, no shouting. The applause was absent, and instead, a murmur of understanding rippled through the gym. The audience wasn't applauding Anna's physical skill, nor was it applauding the fact that she had bested a champion. They were applauding something deeper, something that went beyond the ring and the physical contest. They were applauding her strength, her resolve, her ability to endure. Violet's eyes lifted, and she finally met Anna's gaze again. This time there was no scorn, no arrogance, only a quiet recognition of something she had never allowed herself to see before Marit. The real power of the fight had always been with Anna. It was never about the punches, it was about the soul. Anna stepped back, offering her opponent a small, almost imperceptible nod. She wasn't offering her forgiveness. She wasn't offering Violet any validation. She was simply acknowledging what had happened between them, what had been revealed in the fight. Anna had faced her own demons long before this moment. She had fought for years, not just for survival, but for her own dignity. And in that ring, she had claimed it, not for the world to see, but for herself. Violet took a deep breath, and with considerable effort, pushed herself back to her feet. The physical pain was nothing compared to the internal one, the one that gnawed at her pride. She didn't know what would come next. Didn't know how she would ever regain the confidence she had once worn so easily. But she knew in that moment that she had been given a gift, a lesson in humility, in strength, and in the value of authenticity. The crowd had begun to dissipate, the gym now filling with the sounds of footsteps and whispers. But Anna stayed in the center of the ring, her hands resting at her sides, her breath steady. The fight was over, but for both of them the real battle was just beginning. Anna had won the fight, not because of her fists, but because of her spirit. She had shown the world that strength came from within, that no matter where you came from, no matter who you were, your dignity could never be taken away from you unless you let it. And with that, Anna Barnes had proven to everyone, including herself, that the greatest victory was not in the ring, but in life itself. The gym, now emptying, seemed almost too quiet for a place that had once been filled with the clatter of gloves against leather, the steady thud of punches in midair. The air, once thick with the anticipation of the fight's outcome, now seemed stale, as if it had been held in suspense too long. The crowd, most of whom had gathered to witness a spectacle of power, a public display of humiliation, slowly dispersed in silence, their faces a mix of stunned awe and uncertainty. No one had expected this. No one had expected Anna Barnes to be more than just a pawn in Violet's game of dominance. But the fight wasn't over yet, not for Anna, not for Violet. For Anna, there was no grand celebration. She wasn't looking for the applause. She wasn't interested in the roar of the crowd or the cameras flashing around her. Her victory, if you could even call it that, was something she carried within herself. She had already won in the quiet ways, by standing tall when the world tried to tear her down, by enduring what no one else would. And yet there was a lingering emptiness. She had never fought for glory, for fame, for status. But now, standing there alone in the ring, with the echo of her own heartbeat in her ears, Anna wondered if the world would ever truly see her, not just as a boxer, but as the woman she had fought so hard to become. Would they understand that her fight had never been against Violet? It had always been against the limitations others placed on her, the ones she had fought so hard to escape. The night dragged on, and as Anna prepared to leave the gym, she felt a strange weight settle on her chest. It wasn't a feeling of triumph or victory. It was something heavier, a realization that while she had faced her opponent in the ring and proved herself, there was still so much left to prove. But who was she proving it to? Certainly not to Violet, who had crumbled under her weight. Certainly not to the crowd that had watched her rise. It was to herself. She had to prove to herself that she was worthy, that all the suffering, all the sacrifice had been worth it. In the corner of the gym, Violet lingered, Her trainer, a grizzled man who had spent years watching fighters come and go, stood at a distance watching her with a look of pity. He had trained her, molded her into the champion she once was, and now he saw the shell of the woman who had once ruled the ring. Violet, still catching her breath, wiped the sweat from her brow, but it wasn't just sweat. It was something deeper, something heavier, something she couldn't shake. She had always been the one to control the narrative. She had built her career on the idea that she was invincible, untouchable. Her social media posts, her taunts, her entire persona, it had been a performance, a carefully crafted show for the world. But now, standing there in the aftermath of her loss, she couldn't help but feel that it had all been hollow. The pedestal she had placed herself on was no longer there. She had been brought down not by another fighter's strength, but by her own arrogance, her own inability to see beyond her own image. Violet was used to having control, to commanding the ring with her fists and her words. But now, for the first time in her life, she understood the meaning of true power. It wasn't about who could hit hardest or who could talk the loudest. It was about resilience, the kind Anna had shown. Anna had weathered so much more than Violet could ever imagine, And yet she stood there, unbroken. That was the kind of strength Violet had never known. She glanced up at the ring where Anna had stood moments before. And for the first time, she saw her opponent not as a threat, but as a person, someone who had fought not just with her body, but with her soul. Violet swallowed hard, the lump in her throat heavy with something she hadn't felt in years, humility. The drive home felt long, as if the distance between the gym and her apartment had stretched beyond reason. She sat in the back of the car, staring out the window, at the world that no longer seemed familiar. The lights of the city passed by in blurred streaks, and with each passing second, Violet felt a part of herself slipping away. Her pride, her sense of superiority, what was it all worth now? She had been the queen of the ring, but now she was just another fighter, no different from the countless others who had faded into obscurity after their fall from grace. Back at her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she replayed the fight in her mind. Every punch, every movement, every moment when she realized Anna wasn't just fighting for the scholarship or the win, for the applause. She was fighting for herself. That was the difference. Anna hadn't needed to prove anything to anyone. And now Violet understood that. She had been so consumed with the idea of proving she was the best that she had never stopped to ask herself why she fought. There were no answers in the silence of her apartment, no easy conclusions. But as she sat there in the solitude of the night, something began to shift. Maybe it was time for her to stop pretending, time for her to stop running from the reality that she wasn't invincible, that she wasn't above everyone else. And as the days passed, Violet's regret deepened. It wasn't just about the loss in the ring. It was about the loss of something more important, her own humanity. She had let her ego blind her. I had let her self-image become more important than the people around her. But now, with the sting of Anna's victory still fresh in her mind, Violet knew that there was only one way forward: to rebuild, to redefine herself not as the world champion, but as a woman who had learned something deeper than victory. Meanwhile, Anna's journey continued, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet moments that defined her life. She returned to her work with the foundation, focusing on giving back, on helping others the way she had been helped. She wasn't interested in being a role model, in being a hero, but she knew that her story, her victory, could inspire others to believe in themselves. And for the first time in her life, she understood what it truly meant to be strong. It wasn't about physical power or the cheers of the crowd. It was about enduring, about standing tall when the world tried to break you, and about using your strength to lift others up. The woman, the boy, the man, the soldier, Kaino, who knows his worth, does not chase after money, fame, or choice. Thank you for following this story on Shoe Stories. If this story moved you, taught you something, or made you reflect on the meaning of silence, please like, subscribe to our channel, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below the video. Your voice matters. Let it be heard, whether it's in silence or loud, and don't go anywhere. Click on one of the videos displayed on your screen to watch more powerful stories about dignity and unexpected heroes. We'll see you in the next story.